Hello and welcome to My Career in Data, a podcast where we discuss with industry leaders and experts how they have built their careers. I'm your host, Shannon Kemp, and today we're talking to Brian Parish from iData.
More and more companies are considering investing in data literacy education, but still have questions about its value, purpose, and how to get the ball rolling. Introducing the newest monthly webinar series from Dataversity, Elevating Enterprise Data Literacy, where we discuss the landscape of data literacy and answer your burning questions. Learn more about this new series and register for free at dataversity.net.
Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Dataversity, and this is My Career in Data, a Dataversity Talks podcast dedicated to learning from those who have careers in data management, to understand how they got there, and to be talking with people who help make those careers a little bit easier. To keep up to date in the latest in data management education, go to dataversity.net/subscribe. Today, we are joined by Brian Parish, the founder and CEO of iData, the company behind the Data Cookbook. And normally this is where a podcast host would read a short bio of the guest, but in this podcast, your bio is what we're here to talk about. Brian, hello and welcome.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Excited.
I'm so excited you're here. So tell me, so you're the CEO and founder of iData. So tell me first about iData.
iData, we are a data management company, kind of at its roots. But we had a journey, not unique, but I'm sure lots of other companies have had this. But we started off as a technology consulting firm where we were doing data-related projects, primarily with colleges and universities, and the large amount of data associated with that. So we were doing custom reporting projects, data warehousing projects, system integration projects, custom development projects, all those types of things. And this is, we're going to be our 20th year next year. So we were doing that for 5, 6, 7 years, and I always say that we run into the same problems that organizations run in doing this work themselves, like understanding the data well enough, getting good requirements, and sort of the upfront problems of doing data projects with clients. And then on the back end of that, we would deliver solutions, and sadly find out a couple of years later that people aren't using it because there wasn't enough information or transparency to what it was. And we thought there's got to be a way that we can do this better from a services standpoint, or to help us and help our customers. And at the time, there really wasn't any tools for the data management part, the data governance, the data catalog. So that's so we started in 2008, 2009. We launched the Data Cookbook, which in its early phases was a data governance framework and a business glossary and report specification kind of tool. And that's grown since. And pretty quickly after we released that product, people were much more interested in that tool than they were in our services. So we transitioned over to a product company. So nowadays we have, our main product is the Data Cookbook. It's a full data intelligence, data governance, data catalog solution. But we still have our some foot in the actual data solutions side, where we're still working with a lot of higher education people on package data integration. So that's sort of a 60-40 split in our company. That keeps us honest to do those data-related projects and try to apply the tools that we have. So that's who we are. And been, as I said before, we're coming up on 20 years in the company. And one of the things about doing this for this long is we've worked with over 700 organizations and different projects, and over 300 organizations, and trying to implement data governance. And one of the things you find is that it is not it's easy to do it wrong, right? So giving and a lot of what we do is helping people figure out really pragmatic and simple ways and feasible ways to do data governance with our tool or without our tool. And I'm excited to talk about data careers, because I think that's a big part of it. As people, there's just not enough people in any organization to help people understand their data, to promote or support data literacy and data use, and that's going to be a key need and a growing need as more and more people want to do more and more things with data.
So many questions popped into my mind, but I will
give you a long answer, so that probably
no, it's not long at all. No, it's really good. And you're speaking so many great keywords there, but I want to come back to that a little bit. Because first, I want to ask, so 20 years, first of all, congratulations. That's really a major accomplishment, and that's awesome. So to
Still
so
feels like a startup every day, though. I always feel,
I just think it always does, right?
yeah.
As it, no matter how, how you grow. But so as a CEO right now, as you're working with customers and working with a product, what does your typical work week look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, there's a lot of different paths to CEO in the, in the world. And, I'm a founder CEO that comes as, that started as a developer. And, my company started with just me. Like, I was doing consulting services and we grew that up. So, I was delivering services and then we developed a tool, and, I hired great people to help build these things, but I still am very involved in the product and the services. So I have a team of operational people who support me. There's other CEOs who, people bring in to sort of run the company. And I brought in people to support me to do that. So, I also have, I don't have it on my title officially, but I do serve as the chief product officer too, which is something that I'm sort of have been unwilling to give up, but probably would be helpful. So, I'd say probably a third of my time is, still being involved in, product design and product review and service design and service review. And then another third is sort of strategic work and management type aspects. Another third is sales efforts. I'm doing a lot of that in my role. Squeezed in there, I don't know that for a data company, my math isn't going to work great here, but probably like 10% or so is one thing I really love, is that I do a lot of these best practices webinars and sessions and training for people that frankly kind of falls into the sales and marketing side of what we do, but we really try not to talk about our product, because in our world, the biggest problem that we have with our data governance solution, and this is going a bit off the rails from your question, but when we first launched it, we would go to conferences or talk to people like, hey, we have this data governance solution, and people would be like, a data what? What governance? What are you talking about? And why would you need that? And so we spent a lot of time educating the market on what this thing was. And nowadays, it's a much more, the vast majority of people, through a lot of work like Dataversity and people like that, they understand the need for this and what it is. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they've got a good grip on how to do data governance in their own organization. So for us, for people to use our tool, they really need to be bought in and understand like why they're doing data governance and how to get adoption for it. So the best practices sessions that we have are somewhat self-serving, because the more people understand and buy into data governance and have a good plan for implementing it, the more likely they are to use a tool like the Data Cookbook or other data governance tools. So I really enjoy that part of it. And so that's, good sort of 10% of what we do. So again, my role in the company is still very rooted in the sort of developer analyst that I began with. At some point, sadly, I know I'm gonna have to give that up. I think, or you can't sort of keep doing all of those things. But I do feel very connected to the the people working with data now, because that's still sort of my core as a person. That I started as a developer.
Yeah. Oh, I understand, as you grow, right? As the founder, you get to keep what you want and keep the projects and tasks that you want and delegate what you don't. But at some point, you're right, like you do have to start giving up things that you like too sometimes to make it all
That is
happen.
true, but if you
Yeah.
talk to any other CEO or even a manager, it's like you get to keep what you want, except when things,
Mm-hmm.
other things come up that you can't ignore. Right? I know it's like,
Yeah.
you can keep those things you want unless, until it is, overrun by other fires and things like that. So
Yeah.
I should say 10% of my time is working on fires, but that's probably not.
I understand. Yeah. Well, so okay, so Brian, tell me, so was this a dream when you were, say, like 6 years old? Is this what you wanted to be when you grew up? Say, I'm going to be a founder and CEO of a data governance company.
Well, as I already mentioned, that I don't think I knew what data governance was when I was a kid. Um, but I'm sort of, I like to rebel against that whole concept of you have to know what you want to do when when you grow up, because I feel like you're always, there's all, like, you're never at the end of your journey. But I definitely didn't. Like, when I was a kid, I was a sort of band geek, and I thought I was going to be a band director, or play in a rock band, or who knows. And I did go down a path of I started out, but I was always sort of I grew up at that time. I don't want to date myself, but I guess I will. I grew up in the 80s, when computers were new, and I got very kind of into writing programs and doing stuff early on, and I was lucky enough to go to a really good high school, and where they focused on those things. And so programming was always something that was a big part of me, and with that, of course, working with data and coming up with things like that. So but I was always thinking that I don't want to do this as a career. Like, I want to do these other things. But you never get to sort of, you follow what life brings. And I had an internship when I was a junior in college, and at a software company, an enterprise company, and they were going through a major rewrite of their entire application. And this is an ERP system that has thousands and thousands of tables, and and part of this was a full redesign of their whole data model. And with that came an entire need to do a data conversion for everyone, all of their customers. And I was basically, as an intern, put on this assignment where we were figuring out how to basically map the data from the old system to the new system, understand how that works, how people would manage to understand the data, and all that kind of stuff. And that experience as an intern really stuck with me, and I think continued to inform everything I did. And I ended up going back to work for that company, worked there for like 3 or 4 years, and then quit to go play in the rock band that I was in, thinking that was going to be my future. But turns out I'm much better at data projects than I am at music. So that didn't pay any bills. It was fun though. But
Yeah.
so I went back.
I have to ask, what if you played an instrument, or were you a singer?
Oh,
Or both?
I played an instrument. I definitely was not the singer. I played woodwinds. I was a band geek. I played saxophone and harmonica
Nice.
in the band. So yeah.
Nice.
But
Fun.
yeah, so I did that. Stayed at that company for a while, and kept doing data related projects, and then at some point, that led me to work for another consulting company, and at some point I was sort of like, I think I could do this better on my own, and that's when I left and started doing consulting. But had in my mind that and I don't want to kind of jump to the question that you haven't asked yet, but I think what I learned as a consultant, like being, that I could get hired to go work for, in this case, I was working in higher education, so I could go work for a college to help them with a data related project. And I was a mediocre developer, right? And maybe a pretty good analyst, but there was nothing special about my skills as a developer. But what made me marketable to those customers is that I understood where the data was, and and not just like I understood the data, but it's an enormous enough system that there's no way I could understand everything. But I also knew the key to figuring out where the data lives, and how, like, I knew the keys to the tools to let me figure these things out, where a lot of people didn't. And I was always surprised by that. I mean, it just seemed like it wasn't that difficult to understand those things. So, at some point, I transitioned to saying, maybe rather than, it's not very scalable to sell my own knowledge on how to do this. Like, maybe what you need to do is to, help provide to the world the ability to access this data, and that's sort of where the data cookbook and data literacy rules came out. So again, that's just sort of one thing led to another from getting these kind of data related projects, and building from there. But it was definitely not my dream to be a CEO, I don't think. So.
Well, it's you're not the first musician, I should say, that in data.
Yeah,
Which I love.
it's true. I mean, I think anyone, I don't want to discourage anyone from doing this job, but I do think that there is something there's something special about people in music and the way their pattern recognition and their and combined with creativity and sort of mathematical skills that tends to be a good indicator of talent in the world of data and programming.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Well, that's I love that. It's so you just charged out on your own and then kept finding more problems to solve and then created a tool to solve it. I love it. Um,
An interesting thing I was thinking about when before this podcast I'm talking about careers is that when I was thinking about my career, it wasn't necessarily that I was succeeding and then building on the successes. It was more often that there was a failure and I realized what caused that failure. And then maybe I'll go work on something that will help, correct that failure. So, a lot of the things like the data cookbook tool that we deliver comes out of, having projects fail. That, why was this so difficult up front, to give good requirements? Why is no one using this tool? And things that I did as a consultant, things that the companies I worked at before, I worked for this company that went through multiple initiatives of releasing reporting tools attached to their product. And, they would sit around saying, why is nobody using this tool? Like, maybe we need another tool. And at some point I was like, the problem isn't the tool. The problem is that your data is hidden. Like people don't, know how to get to the data. And that's what you should do. And when I was very early in my career, I got this throwaway project given to me to build a process that would run through they had a proprietary development tool. So it wasn't like, the data was fairly hidden. The metadata was very hidden. I built a tool that would take all that stuff and dump it out to HTML pages, right? And then they would just publish it. And it was this tech doc online thing that we did. And I wrote that code 30 years ago, I think. And that is still being used by people like at that company. Like it is like the most effective thing I ever wrote. And that was also something you look back and say, hey, that thing that made data, the metadata, the information on their data available to people is the most impactful thing I ever wrote in that job. And so anyway, there's the things that sort of you think about and say, well, why, maybe I should put my energy towards those things that were either embedded or things that, this thing calls a problem. I figure out how to fix that problem. So.
We've talked about it a few times on the podcast, and I'm so glad that you brought up failure because I know it was a hard lesson for me. I went into, jobs thinking I had to be perfect, but failure is where you learn and get better. And it's when you stop fearing it, life is so much easier, and you're more successful or you have an ability to be more successful in what you're doing. And just that natural curiosity too, of okay, so what went wrong, why did it go wrong, and troubleshooting it and then figuring out a solution instead of going, oh gosh, I failed. And the world is coming to an end, right? So yeah, it's a hard thing to learn sometimes so I love that that's how everything has evolved. And thank you for bringing that up. Um, so tell me then, so what has been your biggest lesson? Is it so far in your career? And you've mentioned a few kind of lessons already.
Yeah. I mean that sort of lesson about, I don't know, this transition in my career from in terms of related to the use of data is, I mentioned that one of the value that I was delivering early in my career as a consultant was that I knew the data well enough, or I knew the tools to figure out the data well enough. And I encountered a number of people along the way who would advise me to hoard that knowledge, like to not share it. Like, don't ever tell anyone how you figured that out, right? Because as soon as you do, your value goes away. And there are people who've made very successful careers following that path that I was just like, that doesn't make any sense for me. It's like, I think I've got more things to figure out in this world than, retain, like hoarding this knowledge and making sure nobody can figure it out. And I think there's more value. People are going to be more interested in what I have and what my company has, and helping people understand that. So that's been kind of a guiding principle for us. It's sort of led into the tool itself is transparency and what we do, and sort of the showing your work aspect of doing data related projects. And we've worked with companies before that are like analytics companies that provide package data warehousing and things, and they are very guarded and very protective of their underlying data model. Like, this is our IP, we can't share it with people. And I always tell them, like, all right, well, that's a good way to guarantee that eventually no one's going to use your product, because if they don't understand how this stuff is calculated and how it works, like, you should stop being so worried about you've got some miracle thing in there, and be more concerned about whether or not people are successful using your product. And that's been the guy, like, learning that lesson, that, or just maybe fighting back a little on our, with that gut reaction to, it's not about hoarding knowledge and it's about enabling the people that you're working with to be successful when you're gone. I always say, like, if I'm doing a project and you don't have to call me to come back and, add a field or fix a whatever, then I've done it right. And I might make an extra $1,000 coming back doing that maintenance, but I'd rather have the $10,000+ of the referral because you love what we did so much. That's sort of the lesson that I learned, and I think in the career people really respect that. So.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Mm-hmm.
And very good advice. So having worked with data for 20 some odd years now, what is your definition
That's
of
generous.
data?
30.
So what is your definition of data?
Oh, geez. First of all, I should tell a little, I mean, not necessarily a joke, but, I always say that, there's two camps of the data, whether or not data is plural or singular. I don't know where data diversity falls on this argument, or if it's ever come up in your sessions, but that's always the first thing. Like, people can't even agree about whether or not it's a plural word or a singular. Like, there's a problem with the data, or there's a problem, or there's a problem. Anyway, that's the data are, or the data is people, right? That's the issue. The data is information. Data is the data. See, I'm an is person, so there's probably people cringing right now. And it tends to be, by the way, in my experience, my wife is sort of a economist. I don't want to, like, a soft sciences type person, and then the technology side of things more as a data is people, and the soft people are data aren't people. But they can't agree on that, so it's tough to agree on a lot of other things around data. But if you just think of it, it's information, and it's the things that you need to answer questions, and all those kinds of things. What I find a more interesting side of that question is when you're looking at the scope of data governance or data intelligence or data catalog type things, that our product supports, that your company talks about with data diversity, is that there's so many different terminology on how they talk about what's a glossary, what's a dictionary, what's a steward, what's a trustee, what's a catalog, what's all those types of things. And one of the things I say during sales calls or best practices calls when I talk about this with the organization is that it's ironically the term data dictionary is one of the worst defined terms in data governance. Like, because if you're talking to an IT or tech person, they'll be like, oh, yeah, we have a data dictionary, and they're talking, oh, it's a describe of their database. And then you ask a functional person or whatever, like, oh yeah, we have a data dictionary, and they're talking about a glossary or business terms. And it doesn't really what I always say is, it doesn't really matter what you call it, as long as you're in an agreement within your organization on what this thing means. But the biggest issues with data and the definition of data are, from a governance perspective, or what it meta level, is that people set out on these initiatives, and I've seen it all the time, where they say, we're going to do a data governance initiative, and they have a room full of people that they say that they're going to do this with, and everyone's like, great, And they all go off to their corners, and all 12 of them are like, they're going to solve my data quality problem. Another person's like, they're going to solve my data literacy problem. Another person's like, they're going to solve my policy and retention problem, and they're going to solve my data access problem. And we didn't say that. We said we're going to do, but everyone has their own interpretation. And it's true. It kind of covers way broadly all these things. So the biggest issue that we see when people set out to these initiatives is that they're not specific enough around defining like what are the problems we're trying to solve, and what are the best practices that we're doing to do that, and the tools that we're going to do, and the expectations from people and from things like that. And if you don't set those expectations right and define your terminology around the best practices of data governance, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot to start. So.
With a robust catalog of courses offered on demand and industry-leading live online sessions throughout the year, the Dataversity Training Center is your launchpad for career success. Browse the complete catalog at training.dataversity.net and use code DVTalks for 20% off your purchase.
That's a best practice tip for sure. Okay, so then let me expand on that a little bit too. And so since you brought it up a few times, that data governance, what's your definition of data governance?
Well, it's changed over the years. I mean, I think
Sure.
Because it keeps getting bigger and smaller. When I talk about data governance, I talk about the human curation aspect of data, right? Mm-hmm. So the engagement of subject matter expertise and business makers in making decisions or defining or curating the data. Oftentimes that could be conflated with the sort of content, the catalog content or the information around your data. And again, as I say, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it can be a catch-all phrase. I enjoy, a more common phrase these days than used to be is the concept of data intelligence as the catch-all. Like data intelligence, we always say we have a data intelligence solution that helps your organization have the knowledge and processes and people and to facilitate better use of your data. And that data intelligence includes a framework for data governance, that human curation activity, and your kind of data catalog content, which has a whole variety of different types of information around your data, be it data system inventories, report catalogs, data flow and lineage, data quality, rules and assessments and monitoring, reference data, and all these types of things. So so I think if you kind of narrow governance to that, the human curation activities, it helps people understand that, and then the governance is over all that other content. So that's how we like to talk about it.
I think that's very valid, and we get companies approach us all the time who or people from within companies saying, I need help explaining what data governance is. And that's very clear and concise. And, so many executives have come to think that, data governance is a dirty word. It's just about following, policies and laws and
that is a challenge. I mean, I deal with that all the time. And I usually, if I'm start talking to an organization for the first time, I'll ask them, what are your goals? And it's a really difficult thing, because I'll ask them what their goals are, and I say, well, we need a data dictionary, or we need a data catalog. And I was like, well, that's not a goal. That's a means. Like, what is your goal? And I equate this to diet and exercise. And this is like the worst sales thing ever for a data governance tool. But I say that data governance and data catalog, it's the diet and exercise of reporting or of use of data. Like if you have reporting tools, if you have a data warehouse, if you've got projects, if you have a good data governance and data catalog structure around that, you're going to be successful, right? And it's like, if you are a person who wants to lose weight and get in shape, diet and exercise, you're going to be successful, right? But you have to be bought into that, right? You have to say, like, I'm going to do diet and exercise. But the goal, like, if you say, what is your fitness goal? And someone says, my fitness goal is to do 100 sit-ups. Like, that's not a goal, right? So that's when you ask someone, what is your goal for data governance? And they say, well, my goal is to have a data catalog. I say, well, that's not, like, why? And the answer would be, and this is where it gets interesting, is that depending on what the answer is to that question, and there may be more than one, there's very different approaches you will take in implementing data governance, right? So if someone says, we have a data warehouse project and we're really interested in documenting the lineage, and that's a critical thing. Or they say, we have a new reporting tool we're implementing, and we want to make sure that there's self-service reporting and people have enough knowledge of the data to execute on that. Or they say, nobody trusts any of the data in our company. They all they're in disagreement. They think there's data quality problems everywhere, or there's, everyone's arguing over what things mean. Like, all of those things are solved by various best practices, data quality workflows, policy processes, all these types of things. But, with different priorities in each one and different methods. And so if you can get people to talk about what the outcomes are that they're trying to solve with data governance, then you can say, well, this part of data governance is where you want to start, and then you build from there. So that's, I don't know, maybe I've lost the original question that you asked, but that's the
honestly, I could go down this rabbit hole for a while, but let me turn it back to the bio. And again, especially because you have been in data for 20 plus years, and do you see the importance of data management and the number of jobs working with data increasing or decreasing over the next 10 years, and why?
Yeah, well, you can always get in trouble for predicting the future, but I don't see any reason that data related jobs are going away. I mean, some people might worry about AI or things like that, but I'll talk about that in a second, because I don't think that's the case. But I think that, first of all, it's obvious to say that the amount of data and the need for data is growing at an enormous rate, and it's going to continue to do that. And so being able, the need to tap into that in a whole bunch of different ways, and even ways we haven't thought about now, is going to be important. And so we could probably have a whole bunch of interesting conversations around data science and data analysis and tools for analyzing data and all that kind of stuff. But I want to talk about the data management part of that, which is that, and I'll talk a little bit about AI here, is that a lot of people think, I get asked all the time about our tool, like, oh, does your tool, like, a lot of people want a data catalog tool to, they want to say, do you have AI and machine learning that can basically categorize all my data for me? Right. And I'm like, well, there's certain things that we can do, but also, the most common situation we have is, like, in higher ed, there's this concept that is sort of very hard for people to understand. It's student engagement. So if you're asking yourself, how do I tell whether or not a student, particularly an online student, is engaged, right? And to see if they are maybe at risk of falling off, and so there's lots of ways you can measure that. When is the last time they logged in? How are they doing with their grades? Like, but there is no clear definition of that, or no standard definition of that. And so when people start talking about student engagement, they, it's very hypothetical, so, but it's a question people are asking all the time. How are our students engaging? What's the level of student engagement? And so in your standard college or standard organization or standard company doing this, if you ask 10 people, how do we measure student engagement, or how should we measure student engagement, you're going to get 10 different answers, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you had AI come in and say, ask AI, how should we calculate student, you're going to get an 11th answer that's probably very wrong, right? So the data management exercise there, from a glossary standpoint, is to find agreement where it matters, and contextual definitions for the other things. I always say that another thing people argue about with business glossary is, people will say, we have 10 different definitions of student engagement. And I usually, and when they say that, what they mean is, we need to agree on what the one definition is. And I always say, well, that's not really the case. You have 10 different things you're calling student engagement, and you need to figure out, like, how you want to name each one of those. And this exercise is, like, if you are able to define what that means from a functional standpoint, and then connect it technically to, like, this is where it lives in these data systems, that's the powerful thing that will feed an AI, a language model, machine learning, to generate SQL and do all that kind of thing. So what I'm saying with that is that this effort of curating, cataloging, defining things, getting consensus and decision, and managing the data is going to become more important in order to feed what will later may replace some jobs, like writing SQL, maybe something that's done by a computer, right? But you have to give that computer the information necessary to understand that. And the big problem we have right now, which I think is people are making this big leap, is that we haven't figured out how to decide for ourselves what something means. So I'm not sure that we're ready to let a computer do it. So I think there's plenty of jobs out there for this. And I don't think we have to worry about defining everything, and there's nothing new to define, and we're out of jobs. That's never going to happen. So yeah, I think there's plenty of work in all sorts of ways, and also new jobs that we've never even thought about to better interpret data. And I'm sure you've probably had people on here who know more about this than I do, but also storytelling with data is a critical part as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very critical. I absolutely agree. So what advice then would you give to people who are looking to get into a career in data management, maybe in any aspect or maybe specifically data governance?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's lots of careers in data, which I'm sure you have no shortage of podcasts here on this topic. But I think if you want to talk about data management, one thing that I've kind of learned is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a technical person. Where we've seen really good people in the data management roles or data governance roles, they come from more of a library sciences background than a data science background. Because you're really talking about categorizing and organizing and collaborating on things. So I wouldn't be scared away from a data governance career if you're non-technical necessarily, because I think there's a big part of it. So that's something to think about. I obviously knowing data science and knowing the data is important, but I think for both sides of that, if you are a library science or someone who understands categorization of those types of very organized person, then I think those skills you can apply to data management by getting some education in the data, knowing some technical components, but you don't have to be an expert. Like I said, I'm a mediocre programmer, but I do okay with data management. And I think the flip side of that is that if you are a programmer, and you're really great at algorithms, I mean, that's awesome, and you can write really efficient code. It is good to step back and look at the functional side of things. And the one thing I have think about with data governance a lot is that as an overall initiative in an organization, data governance is where you're bringing together your functional and technical people, and you're getting them on the same page, that we agree on things. And sometimes that's a real struggle. Technical people oftentimes are like, why would, I know this, why would you, want to think, and functional people have the other, like, I don't need to know that technical stuff. But the last thing I'll say about data governance, and I'll say two things about this from a career standpoint, is that I think that empathy is a critical skill in data governance. I mean, it's a critical skill in life, but what this really is, the challenge that a lot of developers have, and stereotyping is not good, right? I'd say there's two types of people who, separate groups of people into two types and people who don't. But stereotyping developers is that many of them oftentimes, like, it's not easy for them to perceive of people who don't know what they know, right? Like, they're like, I've got this information about this thing, like, obviously everybody else is going to know how this works, or and so, and same thing with experts. Like, experts don't always, like, anyone who has an expert on something, it's really hard for them to explain it to someone, because they feel it's difficult for them to empathize with people who don't have the knowledge that they do. So an exercise in data literacy and governance is saying, how do I share this information and create transparency around our data to the masses, the old explain it like I'm a 5-year-old kind of thing, and put that out there. So that's a type of skill that you want to try to cultivate. Technical writing, things like that are good. Now, I'm going to make a generalization about careers, and there may be people who disagree with this. This is my opinion, and it goes counter to my entire industry that I work in higher education. Is that when I get resumes from programmers or developers or anyone who's doing work, it is great if you've gone to a good school. It's great if you've taken good classes, but there's lots of people who've gone to good schools. There's lots of people who've gone to good classes, and you can go to good classes and learn good things and not necessarily be great at it, right? It's hard to tell. So I always recommend that if there's something that you're passionate about, a career that you want to follow, find a way to do a project outside of school or outside of your current job that demonstrates both your passion for that thing and your ability to solve problems. So, hey, I created a database to help manage my friends' bands bookings at shows or whatever, or I, help the Girl Scouts figure out their cookie sales in this, whatever it might be, like in that area. And I tell you, I will value those things when I see them on a job application or hear them in an interview, 10 or 100 times more than, I took a class in XYZ, because I know that this person enjoys doing that and can actually apply real world problems to it. So I would recommend that if it's doing an internship, that's great. I mean, my whole career kind of started with, random internship, but find something that you can do outside of work that demonstrates that thing that you want to do in technology or in data. And it doesn't have to be a Nobel Prize. It can be, like I said, helping the Girl Scouts figure out their cookie sales. Like, as long as you've done something and can say, there was a problem, I figured out how to solve it, I use these tools. Because a lot of times people who are hiring, they're not, technology changes so quickly. We're not looking for people who know X skill necessarily. We're looking for people who know how to apply, look at a problem and find a solution for it and apply whatever things. And I keep rambling here, but there's one other lesson. I sort of skipped this part of my bio, but I spent a year living in Kenya when I was younger, kind of in a find yourself sort of thing. And I knew a lot of Peace Corps people there. And there's this concept in the Peace Corps called appropriate technology. And I think it's a fascinating thing. It's like going into a situation, particularly in, developing world or whatever. And it's not like, oh, here's a classroom of kids and we're going to solve the problem by giving them all laptops. Well, you realize, they don't have electricity here. They don't have a way to fix those laptops. Like, you want to find what's the appropriate technology to solve the problem there. And that is a really good thing to learn from a problem solving standpoint. How can you apply, not that I'm the smartest person that can use the most up-to-date tools to solve this, but I was able to solve that problem with whatever the appropriate tools that were available were. And I think that's a great thing too. So.
It's really, really great advice. I really like that a lot. And something new that we haven't heard yet, which I think makes it even more valuable. So thank you for that. And I'm now reevaluating my whole interview style.
Don't do that. You're great. I think you're wonderful.
No, or what I'm looking for and for staff, I'm like, oh, I love that. Looking for extracurricular. Yeah, I think that's great because it's so true. Problem solving, demonstration of being able to problem solve is such a skill, and that passion for it and that curiosity to find those. And yeah, so well, Brian, this has been so fabulous. I can seriously talk to you for a lot longer, but but we do have to keep it in a time frame. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask, where would people go if they want to find out more about iData and the Data Cookbook?
Yeah, sure. So, if you're interested in learning about our Data Cookbook product, you can go to datacookbook.com. There's all sorts of information there. The thing I'm really proud of right now, and that I've been getting a lot of good feedback on, is our data governance best practices webinar series that we did. It's totally free, and you can get there going to datacookbook.com/DG, I think is what it is. And then from there, you can click down to our best practices series. It's a 20 session series about what we call the pragmatic data governance, like how to make data governance work with limited resources. I mentioned that we work with higher ed. Most of our customers are, either nonprofit or public sector, and have limited budgets and limited people. And so, they can't dedicate full-time people to data governance and hundreds of thousands of dollars to tools. So they have to figure out how to make it work with their regular job. And that's one benefit of been doing this for 20 years is we've learned from our failures, right? We've learned from what hasn't worked and how do you adjust to have a solution that is, as practical and feasible for people. So I check out that best practices series if you're interested. And then and then iData Inc., iDataInc.com is the company website if you want to learn more about what we do in our system integration world and all of that. And also, we'll be at Dataversity DGIQ conferences as well. So
Fabulous.
yeah.
I love that. Oh, that's awesome. Well, Brian, I encourage people to go check out the webinars as well. I've heard you speak. You're a great speaker, which is why I invited you to be here because you have so much passion. And I could talk to you for so much longer.
Well, I've never been my highest skill is not brevity, so I apologize for talking for too long. But I could also I could keep talking for a long time. So I'd love to be back anytime if you have another topic that you want to discuss. But I am enjoying listening to the rest of this series. I think it's great. So.
Thank you so much. Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Yeah, thank you, and have a wonderful weekend and a great rest of the year. So, all right. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And to all of our listeners out there, if you'd like to keep up to date in the latest podcasts and the latest in data management education, you may go to dataversity.net/subscribe. Until next time, and stay curious. Thank you for listening to Dataversity Talks, a podcast brought to you by Dataversity. Subscribe to our newsletter for podcast updates and information about our free educational webinars at dataversity.net/subscribe.